When I think about the relationship many women have with their bodies, especially when it comes to menstruation, what strikes me most is how early the silence begins. I remember being a young girl and feeling a strange mix of pride and shame the first time I got my period. I had this sense that I had crossed some invisible line into womanhood, but at the same time I felt I had to keep it hidden, as if it were something inappropriate. That duality, the experience of something deeply human being treated as something deeply embarrassing, stayed with me. And it wasn't just me, it was everywhere, in schools, in families, in films, in the way advertisements spoke in code about that time of the month. We weren't just taught to manage our periods, we were taught to hide them. Quietly, politely, invisibly, over time, I realized how much of that silence was inherited. Our mothers, our grandmothers, even our teachers carried it. It wasn't always intentional. It was part of a larger cultural script that told us menstruation was too messy, too uncomfortable, too unclean to be spoken of openly. But the message landed all the same: your body is something to apologize for. As I grew older and began to write and direct films, I found myself coming back again and again to stories about things that were hidden, especially the things women are told to hide: secrets, traumas. Bodies, there is something so radical, so necessary about simply telling the truth. Menstruation is not dirty, it's not shameful, it's not even particularly unusual. It happens to half the world, and yet so many of us grow up thinking it's something to conceal. I remember being on set as a young actress, terrified that someone might see a tampon in my bag or notice I had cramps. That fear is exhausting. It wears you down. It's not just the physical discomfort, it's the emotional labor of pretending your body doesn't do what it naturally does. And what's worse, that silence keeps us from asking for the things we need, whether it's access to menstrual products, health care, or simply understanding. The shame isolates us. It teaches us to be small. But I've also seen what happens when women start to talk, when they tell their daughters, their friends, their audiences, "This is what my body does, and I will not be ashamed of it." It's subtle, but it's powerful. The room shifts. A kind of collective permission is given to feel, to speak, to be. That's the change we need. We don't need louder commercials or more euphemisms. We need honesty. We need to say, without blinking, that menstruation is part of life, and treating it like a secret only makes the world smaller for the next girl coming of age. There is a quiet dignity in naming something that has always been silenced. I've learned that as a filmmaker, yes, but more importantly as a woman. When we stop whispering about our bodies and start speaking in full voice, something opens. We make space, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who has felt ashamed, confused, or alone in their experience. We turn what was once considered impolite into something empowering. And maybe, just maybe, we raise a generation that doesn't learn to hide who they are from the very start. So no, my body is not a secret. It never was, and the more we speak, the less shame there is to carry. Growing up, I was taught many things about being a girl: how to be polite, how to be kind, how to be careful, but no one ever really talked to me about desire. It wasn't that the topic of sex didn't exist at all, but it was shaped entirely through fear and silence. For a long time, I believed that the only way a woman could be respected was if she was quiet about what she wanted, if she didn't ask too many questions, if she didn't show too much interest. I was made to believe that wanting, especially wanting emotionally or sexually, was dangerous, that it somehow made you less respectable, less worthy, less pure. It took me years to realize that this quiet conditioning was not unique to me. It's something that so many women carry, often without even being able to name it, a deep internalized belief that our desire makes us wrong. And it doesn't just come from the media or religion or school, it comes from everywhere, layered and subtle. We're taught to protect ourselves, yes, but sometimes that protection looks like suppressing our own needs. We're told we should wait to be chosen instead of recognizing that we are allowed to choose too. For a long time, I carried a quiet guilt around even the most basic emotional needs. If I wanted connection, I felt needy. If I desired someone, I felt ashamed. Even love, which is supposed to be this beautiful thing, felt tangled up with self-judgment. I would ask myself, am I too much? Am I being dramatic? Do I have a right to feel this way? It's such a strange thing to be at war with your own longing, to feel as though you have to apologize for being human. As a filmmaker, I found myself drawn to stories that reflected this inner conflict, not because I had the answers, but because I wanted to understand it better. I wanted to make space for women who weren't perfect, who wanted things deeply, who were messy and complicated and unapologetically real. Because I think what's missing in so many of our conversations about sex and love is compassion. We forget how powerful it is to say, "You are allowed to feel this. You are not broken. Desire is not a flaw. It is not something to be cured or silenced or hidden. It's a part of being alive. Women deserve to feel pleasure, to ask for it, to own it without feeling like they need to apologize. We deserve to love with our whole hearts without being told we're weak. And we deserve to walk away from what harms us without being blamed for ever wanting it in the first place." When we allow ourselves to feel without shame, we begin to see our full selves, not just the versions shaped by what others think is acceptable. And when we start sharing that truth with others, something shifts. The guilt begins to loosen its grip, the silence begins to fade. I've seen it in conversations with friends, in the letters women write to me after watching my films, in the way a single moment of vulnerability can ripple outward and make space for someone else. We need to stop teaching girls that their desire is dangerous or that love makes them weak. We need to start telling them that their feelings are valid, that their bodies are their own, and that wanting something, whether it's closeness, intimacy, or joy, is not something to be ashamed of. I'm still learning how to live that truth myself, but I believe in the power of saying it out loud. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are enough exactly as you are. When I was younger, I believed my body was something I had to fix. Not in dramatic ways, just in quiet, constant ones. I wanted smoother skin, flatter stomach, thinner arms, fewer marks, fewer curves, more curves, depending on the year and whatever impossible standard was floating around at the time. I don't remember anyone sitting me down and telling me directly that my body wasn't good enough. But somehow, through magazine covers, TV shows, offhand comments, and unspoken comparisons, the message found its way in. Your body is only as valuable as it is pleasing to others. And if it doesn't look the way it's supposed to, hide it, change it, apologize for it. It wasn't until later, much later, that I started to question this belief, that I began to look at the parts of myself I'd been told to fix and saw something else, evidence of life. A stretch mark wasn't a flaw, it was a memory. A scar wasn't something to conceal, it was proof of healing. Even the softness I'd once tried so hard to shrink or tone away was not a failure, but a part of me that held stories, strength, protection. I realized how much time I had spent trying to make myself smaller, trying to become someone else's version of acceptable, and I began to wonder what would happen if we all stopped doing that. If we stopped treating our bodies like problems to be solved and started seeing them as stories to be honored. For me, storytelling has always been about revealing what's hidden, the quiet truths, the vulnerable pieces. And I think the female body, in its real, unfiltered form, is one of the most silenced stories there is. We rarely see it celebrated as it truly is, not polished, not perfected, but lived in. A woman's body tells 1,000 stories, yet so many of them go unheard because we've been taught to cover them up, hide the evidence, blur the lines, erase the parts that might offend or discomfort someone else. But those parts, those exact parts are where the truth lives, the scar from a surgery, the loose skin after childbirth, the lines from laughter, from grief, from time. These are not imperfections, they are proof that we've lived. And yet we spend so much of our lives feeling shame over them, as if survival needs to be edited into something more attractive, as if being real makes us less worthy. I've had the privilege of directing stories where women are allowed to show themselves fully, not just emotionally, but physically too, and the impact is always the same. Something breaks open, a wall comes down. There's a relief, a recognition. We begin to see ourselves not through the lens of judgment, but through the eyes of compassion. We start to understand that we don't need to be flawless to be beautiful. We only need to be whole. I'm still learning to love the body I once tried to change. Some days are easier than others. But what I know now with certainty is that my body is not an enemy. It is not a failure. It is not a project. It is a record of my life. And I wish every girl growing up today could know that from the very beginning, that her body, just as it is powerful, that she doesn't need to shrink or hide or apologize. That every stretch mark, scar, and soft curve is a line in the poem of who she is, and that story is worth telling, boldly, unapologetically, and with pride. There was a time in my life when I believed love was supposed to feel like losing yourself. I didn't have the words for it then, but looking back, I can see how easily I gave away pieces of myself just to keep someone else comfortable. I thought that was strength, or maybe sacrifice. I thought blending into someone else's life, fitting their idea of me, was what love was about. But I learned through heartbreak and years of reflection that love which costs you your voice, your boundaries, your sense of self is not love. It's erasure, and for so many women, that kind of erasure is far too familiar. We are taught from a young age to be accommodating, to be pleasing, to compromise, and while those qualities can be beautiful when they come from a place of choice, they become dangerous when they're expected. I used to think that being loved meant being chosen, and being chosen meant being agreeable, less demanding, more flexible, less. Me, I saw it in films, in family dynamics, in quiet examples all around me. The woman who gives everything, the woman who sacrifices silently, the woman who disappears in the name of devotion. We were shown over and over again that love makes you softer, smaller, easier to be around. And so we tried to become that. As a filmmaker, I began to notice this thread in the stories I wanted to tell, the tension between who women really are and who they feel they need to be to keep love in their lives. I wanted to write about women who were full, women who resisted being folded into someone else's expectations, because I had begun to understand that real love, healthy love, doesn't ask you to give yourself up. It asks you to bring your full self forward. It holds space for your voice, your needs, your identity. It doesn't demand that you shrink. When you lose yourself in a relationship, you don't even notice it at first. It happens in small, almost invisible ways. You say yes when you mean no. You stop asking for what you want. You worry that your emotions are too much. You stop trusting your instincts, and by the time you realize you've disappeared, it can be hard to find your way back. I know that feeling. I've lived it, but I also know what it means to rebuild, to return to yourself not with anger, but with understanding, to forgive yourself for the times you stayed too quiet, to start, slowly, speaking again, first to yourself, then to others. There is a deep, powerful kind of love that does not require your silence. It doesn't fear your strength. It invites it, and that kind of love begins with the one you build with yourself. It sounds cliché, I know, but it's true. When you know your worth, you stop accepting love that feels like a transaction. You stop trying to earn your place. You stop believing that being loved means being less. And you begin to realize that the kind of love you deserve is the one that celebrates who you are, not the version of you that makes everyone else more comfortable. I still believe in love, fiercely. But I believe in love that honors, not erases, that listens, that stays when you speak your truth, and I hope we can start teaching girls, not just through our words, but through our examples, that love should never mean losing yourself, that their voices matter even when they shake, that compromise is not the same as disappearance, and that the right love will never ask them to choose between being true and being loved. Because the most powerful love stories are the ones where you remain yourself, fully and fearlessly, all the way through. When I was a teenager, I remember sitting through the mandatory sex education classes in school, if you could even call them that. We were given diagrams, vague warnings, and a strong sense that everything related to sex and our bodies was something to be careful of, something to be ashamed of, or something to avoid altogether. What we weren't given was space. Space to ask real questions, space to talk about feelings, consent, or emotional connection. No one spoke about desire or boundaries, or even the fact that sex could be both meaningful and messy. What I needed wasn't just sex education for my body, it was sex education for my soul. But that wasn't something anyone offered us. So much of what I've learned about sex, relationships, and intimacy, I had to learn on my own, and often the hard way, through confusion, through silence, through stories I didn't know how to tell at the time. I think what hurts the most looking back is not the mistakes, but how unprepared I was to understand what those experiences meant, how little language I had to name what I was feeling, how I didn't know the difference between discomfort and danger, or between love and obligation. It's not just that I didn't have the right information, it's that I didn't know I was allowed to ask for it. As women, so many of us grow up with this profound lack of honest education around our bodies and our emotional lives. We're taught about consequences, pregnancy, disease, regret, but rarely about agency, about joy, about mutual respect. And when we're not taught those things, we internalize the belief that sex is something that happens to us, not something we actively participate in, that it's something we should be afraid of or ashamed of, instead of something we should approach with self-awareness, choice, and care. What I've come to believe through my own experiences and through the stories I've had the privilege to tell as a filmmaker is that real sex education should include more than just biology. It should be rooted in compassion. It should teach emotional intelligence, self-respect, and consent as deeply as it teaches anatomy. It should empower young people, especially girls, to understand their own desires and limits, to ask for what they need, and to know that they have the right to say yes and the right to say no. We have spent too long pretending that silence protects, that avoiding these conversations is the safer path, but silence is not safety. Silence leaves us vulnerable. Silence breeds shame, and shame makes us quiet when we most need to speak. When we don't talk about these things, we lose the opportunity to guide young people into adulthood with clarity, confidence, and care. We abandon them to learn through pain what could have been shared through love. I believe that change begins when we start telling the truth, honestly, awkwardly, imperfectly, when we create spaces where girls can ask questions without fear of judgment, where they can see their bodies not as problems, but as sources of wisdom and strength. When we give them the tools not just to protect themselves, but to know themselves, because sex is not just about the body, it's about the heart, the spirit, the voice, and every woman deserves to know that her voice matters. So if I could speak to my younger self, or to any young girl now, I'd say this: you don't need to have all the answers. You just need to know you're allowed to ask, you're allowed to feel, you're allowed to say what you want, and what you don't. Your body belongs to you, your heart belongs to you, and your story is yours to write, and it's never, ever something to be ashamed of. I remember the first time I saw a conversation about period poverty. It was in a quiet, almost off-hand article I stumbled across. A girl, maybe 14, missed school every month because she couldn't afford menstrual products. She used cloth, sometimes even newspaper, and sat at home while the rest of her classmates moved forward in their education. I read her words and felt a wave of quiet shame, not because of her, but because I had never thought about it before. I had taken it for granted, the access I had always had to pads and tampons, and even more than that, the privacy and dignity that came with them. And it made me realize how many of us are raised to believe that something so essential, so basic, is somehow a luxury. When we speak about menstruation, we often talk about it in hushed tones, if we talk about it at all. And when we do, we tend to focus on the inconvenience, the discomfort, the social awkwardness, but we rarely talk about the economic burden. We rarely talk about the girls who are forced to drop out of school, the women who have to choose between buying food for their families and managing their own health, or the shame that compounds when you can't afford something as fundamental as a clean pad. And it is fundamental. Menstrual products are not optional. They are not a nice extra. They are as necessary as clean water, as food, as shelter. They allow women to move through the world with dignity, to participate in school, in work, in public life without fear or embarrassment. The idea that they are still taxed as luxury items in so many countries is absurd. There is nothing luxurious about managing a natural bodily function in the most basic, humane way. When I began speaking more openly about menstruation in my own work, I realized how quickly the conversation shifted once people understood the human cost of silence and inaccessibility. The issue isn't just about money, it's about worth. It's about how society decides what matters, and by extension, who matters. When we don't make menstrual products accessible and free, especially in schools, shelters, prisons, and low-income communities, we are sending a message, whether we mean to or not, that women's health is negotiable. That dignity is a privilege, not a right. I think about the girls who sit out from school, who wrap themselves in shame and silence because they've been taught that their bodies are too expensive to care for. I think about the young women who have to invent solutions from scraps, who grow up feeling that what they need is too much to ask for. And I think about what it would mean for them to walk into a bathroom and find products waiting for them, not behind a locked cabinet, not behind shame, but freely, confidently, without fear. That kind of message changes things. It says, we see you and you matter. As a woman and as a storyteller, I know how powerful visibility is. When we name something, when we say clearly that menstrual products are a right, not a luxury, we begin to change the systems that have made them inaccessible. We give others permission to speak up. We challenge the quiet injustices that live in everyday life. And most importantly, we rewrite what is considered normal and fair. So no, menstrual products are not extras. They are not indulgences. They are necessities, and access to them should not depend on where you live, how much you earn, or whether your school has a budget for it. Every girl, every woman, deserves the basic tools to care for her body with dignity. And until we make that a global reality, we have work to do